8, it's Cross Question. It's the first of our three programmes this week. Joining me on the panel, we have Stanley Johnson, the writer, broadcaster and environmentalist. Stanley, I called you the first father earlier on. I'm not sure if you've ever been called that before, but there we go. Ben Bradshaw is Labour MP for Exeter, former Cabinet Minister under Gordon Brown. Hashi Mohamed is a barrister and writer. And Harriett Baldwin, Conservative MP for West Worcestershire and former Treasury and Foreign Office Minister. They're here to take your calls. The number to call 0345 6060 973. And I say it every time, you can watch us on Global Player, on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk and the Twitter and Facebook feeds.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Tony in Doncaster. Tony, hi, what would you like to ask?
Hello, Iain.
Hi.
Viewed from abroad, the scenes last night outside Wembley Stadium of the violence and the crowd disorder, does the panel think that that will damage the integrity of the flag of St George, or will the people from overseas just think, well, that's what we've grown to expect from the English?
OK, so the question is, viewed from abroad, will the scenes of violence last night damage the reputation of the flag of St George? Not sure about the flag, but maybe the reputation of this country. I'll add a little supplementary for you, Tony, there. Will it affect our World Cup bid in 2030, which we're doing jointly with the Republic of Ireland? Ben Bradshaw, let's come to you first.
I hope it won't, Tony, and I hope what will be in people's minds was the grace and brilliance of the team and the whole approach that the team and the manager have taken to all of this. I mean, I'm pleased to say that I think 45 people have been arrested in connection with last night's disturbances, which is good news. I hope they're prosecuted. But I suspect the world will be watching, other countries will be watching to see how the government responds both to that unrest, but also to some of the racism that our players have been subjected to in the last 24 hours. But I think that most people are fairly reasonable. I don't think most people abroad think that those fans were typical of most average English people or indeed football supporters. But let's deal with the small minority who drag us down, and let's deal with them pretty thoroughly.
So the interesting thing was walking around Wembley Stadium after the match, when obviously Italian supporters were mixing with England supporters. It was actually, I thought, a really good atmosphere. You had England supporters going up to the Italian supporters, obviously in all their blue shirts, shaking hands with them, saying, "Oh, well done, mate, you deserved it." And that's how it should be. And yet, Hashi Mohamed, we have the reputation of our country damaged, as Tony is basically saying, through the actions of a mindless minority.
Yes, good evening, Iain. Well, as a ratepayer in Wembley and who has lived with the whole of the Euros throughout the period, I can tell you a great deal about rubbish and reputation as far as Wembley is concerned. But I do want to stress that I think that it's definitely a minority. I was very lucky to go and see a couple of games. It's generally been amazingly good-natured. People have been very respectful and tried to make the most of it. And I do think that minority of people who cause that violence will undoubtedly have an impact. But I'll say this, I have plenty of friends in France, in Germany, in Sweden, and many places in Europe. And sadly, they have a particular image of the English fan, a wrong image, but an image that is cast almost in stone. And I don't think that this kind of scenario and what we saw in the last few days is going to do anything to displace that, sadly.
Harriett Baldwin, when you were a Foreign Office Minister, did people sort of talk about this to you? Because we thought we'd seen the last of this. It's a sort of throwback to the 70s and 80s, isn't it, when England had a reputation for football hooliganism?
I certainly think that it was appalling to see that kind of bad behaviour, and I hope that it was not something that has marred in everyone's mind, particularly around the world, the wonderful joy that this tournament has brought to so many. And I think that in particular, speaking to people overseas, colleagues in other countries today, what struck them was how interesting it is to see how after the success of the vaccination rollout, we are actually having gatherings of this size and nature in this country again. And I think it really brought home to a lot of countries where they are completely locked down, how far the UK has come in terms of the vaccination rollout.
Stanley Johnson, what did you make of it?
I kind of missed out on this one. I was driving up from Hashi Extra, there's Ben over there, a long haul, I can tell you. And
so you didn't even see it?
No, I didn't.
You call yourself an Englishman?
No, I saw the match. By the way, I wasn't as lucky as you were. You were obviously there.
I was there.
For heaven's sake. No, I only just got back home from Exmoor in time to turn on the national anthem of Italy, which went on quite a long time, actually, the national anthem.
Very good anthem, I think.
Wonderful. Actually, is it Strauss? Or who?
I have no idea.
Well, absolutely superb. And I've got to say, then with extra time and the penalty shootouts and that long drive, I kind of went to bed. So I sort of missed this event, which I now hear has taken place. It wasn't like storming the Capitol.
Well, it was a bit. I mean, I was literally, I'd just gone through the security and was about to walk into the stadium on the ground level, and I just heard this commotion behind me.
Wow.
And they were throwing the barricades out of the way, and there was about, I would say, 200 just basically stormed the place. And the stewards were incapable of holding them back, and they just rushed in, pelted up the steps, and there was no physical violence towards anybody else at that point. But I understand what happened was when they got inside the stadium, people who had tickets reacted rather badly to this, and as you can imagine, and so there were, I think, a few fracas there. So that it wasn't. It was violent because they ripped the barricades out of the way, but in terms of violence against people, it wasn't. That's no excuse.
There wasn't a Donald Trump figure urging them on. Like that.
Well, I don't think there was. No, I mean Nigel Farage was standing next to me at the time, but that's neither here nor there.
I know it's obviously a very serious issue, and I agree with every people.
But you will remember. I mean, you were in the European Parliament in the 70s, and no doubt you were having to answer for this sort of thing when it was going on in European cities at that point.
You know something? I confess, this whole football business has taken me very much by surprise, if you see what I mean, because it hasn't been my game, football.
but more rugger.
Well, I got to say it was more rugger. But now, of course, it's obviously very, very important, this particular moment. I've been as proud as anybody about, but it has taken me by surprise, and I wouldn't say I've often watched a football match. That said,
next time you see Boris, can you ask him never to wear a football shirt over his normal shirt? How Carrie allowed him to do that, I do not know. Because he's more into his rugby than football.
Well, I shall take this message very, very, very seriously. I had other things I thought I might mention, like the real importance of getting a serious "let's end the loss of nature" target into the Environment Bill. But I think that's, we can...
Right, Tony, let's come back to you. I presume you were watching last night. You were horrified by what you saw.
I thought it was a very shameful event. In fact, it brought back your remarks to me of a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about patriotism and whether you'd ever been ashamed of the country. And you said to me that you had when you saw marauding, drunken football hooligans going through European cities.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, yeah, and I think this is another occasion when shame is the overriding thing that I experienced from it.
I totally agree with you. I think I would say that it could have all been avoided had they not allowed people to turn up to the stadium with no tickets. I mean, there could have been, checks at maybe some of the railway stations, so you couldn't get on the tube or the train if you hadn't got a ticket, that sort of thing. But it was all a bit too lax, I think. Tony, thank you very much indeed. Raveen in Croydon is with us. Hello, Raveen.
Hi, Ian. Thank you very much for taking my call. Hello, panel. My question is really simple. After what we've seen today, does the panel now understand why these players were taking the knee?
Harriett.
Well, I think we can all thoroughly and roundly condemn the appalling racist abuse that has been sent in the direction of these magnificent players and this wonderful, wonderful team. And so I have said all along that I completely respect their decision to do what they were doing. And I think that it just shows that they're uniting in the face of what does still exist as a scourge in our country, which is this terrible racism. And I think that we need to make sure that for those very small minority of people who feel that way, that the social media companies are able and empowered to take action against people, often anonymously, who abuse these social media platforms. And so I would strongly urge the social media companies to block, mute, switch off, and also find the people who are posting these dreadful things.
And the fact that the Home Secretary, before the tournament, was effectively saying it was gesture politics. We've had Tyrone Mings tweeting this evening saying you can't say things like that, and now then come out and say it's all very wrong. It's hypocrisy. Stanley Johnson, do you understand the critics of players who were taking the knee, saying, well, they shouldn't do it because it's supporting a political organisation, whereas the players themselves say, no, we're not supporting a political organisation, we are supporting a cause, and the cause is racial equality?
I think I can absolutely agree with the players on this. History may reveal later on that there are other things behind the Black Lives Matter movement. Who can tell? But that's not what the players think. The players they're entitled to have their opinion. They're entitled to that opinion to be respected. So I very much agree with what Harriett has said on this.
Hashi?
Ian, when Marcus Rashford missed his penalty, and then Jadon Sancho stepped up and missed his penalty, my heart sank, because I thought to myself, my goodness, tomorrow they're going to get the worst possible abuse if we don't win this thing. And then there was a huge...
I hear that, but do you not think that if Harry Kane and Harry Maguire had missed their penalties, they would have got it in the neck too?
They might have got it in the neck for other reasons that have nothing to do with their races, and where they wouldn't have been abused by monkey emojis, and they wouldn't have been abused for basically being subhuman and all the other racist remarks that we have seen. But the point about taking the knee is really quite simple. Taking the knee is a nominal act, really a nominal act that is attempting to keep at the forefront of people's minds the profound problem that exists in our society. And these young people, who are incredibly gifted in the public eye, are using their public space and their public power to just say, look, this is what's happening. And to think that the Home Secretary was urging people, saying that there was absolutely no problem with people booing them, gives you an idea of the difference that we have in this society between those who claim to lead us and those who they just dismiss as nothing more than just footballers. That's the problem with this country.
Ben Bradshaw, the Home Secretary, is a person of colour. She clearly takes a very different view to Stanley, Harriett, Hashi, and I guess yourself as well. Is she not entitled to express her view?
Well, I think she's wrong about this, and I hope the events of the last 24 hours will have given her cause to reflect. I mean, in answer to Raveen's question, I've always understood why this gesture, of some people call it, was important and why it mattered. And I'm not sure I agree with Harriett that that we should simply respect their decision. We should support them in doing it. And it wasn't just the Home Secretary, it was the Prime Minister, it was the Tory MP whose name escapes me, who has boycotted the tournament.
Lee Anderson.
Yes, I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, what a silly man. Boycotted the whole tournament because of the players taking the knee. And, this was why they're doing it, because because of the racism that still exists in our society. Yes, it may be a small minority, and there was a poll out today saying it's only 7 or 8% of the population have hardened racist attitudes like this, but that's still 7 or 8% too many. And I think the players have done really well to withstand some of the pressure they came under and some of the criticism they faced for taking the. They stuck with their guns. They've made clear it's not associating themselves with any particular political party or particular movement. It's simply about standing up for racial equality. And I cannot understand why any politician of any respectable political party should have a problem with that. Let's not just respect it, let's support them doing it and condemn those people who boo them for doing it.
Would all four of you support the continuation of taking the knee into next season? There was a school of thought among some people that said, well, they've made their point last season, and when the crowds come back, we might see an exaggerated version of the booing that happened in some of the earlier England games. But maybe now is the time to say, no, we are going to continue to do it. Harriett?
Yeah, I think in light of what's happened, I would be surprised if they didn't want to continue doing it. I think, one of the things that it's come across in this tournament is that it has been, very much a welcome sign of the unity and diversity of the team. I think in some connotations in the States, it's been used to link to defund the police and so on. So I think to some extent the context does matter, because I'm sure that no one in the studio today would want to be defunding the police.
Very briefly, Stanley.
Well, I don't think I would like this taking the knee to go on forever and ever and ever, because I think there is a case for the depoliticisation of sport. I think there is a sort of general principle that the sport is there and politics is there. You don't always want to mix the two, although I completely accept that in the circumstances of today, given what happened yesterday, it was an absolutely right thing to do.
But nobody thought the Kick It Out campaign was politicising sport. Why would they think that this is... I mean, if they said, yes, we all want to defund the police and we all want to sort of dismantle capitalism, fine, you can make that argument, but they don't say that.
No, I'm looking at the implications later on. I'm looking at how this could expand, could be taken up by other causes. Heaven's sake, I'm an environmentalist. Maybe I'd say, look, this is the time to throw cabbages on the field. Do you see what I mean?
Let's not go there. Hashi.
As an environmentalist, you wouldn't want to waste the food either. But on the point that I would agree with you that I agree with Stanley that I don't want to see this forever. I don't want to watch every game, every season of this happening. But equally, I would like for the FA and the Premier League and other people to take proper action. I'd like the social media companies to take proper action. I'd like us to have a better education system that takes account of these things. So I agree with you that it's a nominal gesture that only puts this at the forefront of people's minds. And the last thing I'd say, Iain, is you prefaced one of the questions by saying that the Home Secretary is a person of colour. That in no way, shape or form means that she is either less wrong than anyone else who takes a different view on this, nor does it give her cover to basically, incite people to boo our players because of her particular political views. I could care less if she was Asian, black, white. She is wrong, and she's in a position of power, and she's used that power completely and utterly irresponsibly. That's the point here.
Well, don't mistake me asking a question for giving a view. Ben?
Not at all.
Yes, I completely agree. I completely agree with Hashi on that, Iain. And I agree with him also about the FA. I mean, I've heard lots of warm words from the FA across the media today, but I still cannot understand why these fans, who must be quite easily identifiable either from camera pictures or from their social media profile, aren't already banned from football matches for life. It can't be, beyond the wit of humankind to enforce that ban. I mean, it's because they're dragging the reputation of the country and the vast majority of decent England fans down.
OK, well, we got 2 questions in the first quarter, which I don't think has ever happened on Cross Question before. So you get kudos for that, all of you. Thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to more of your questions in a moment. Raveen, just 30 seconds from you answering your own question.
Yeah, I mean, I was of the Les Ferdinand view that I need to see more than just taking the knee. Yeah, and maybe it was time for it to to stop, because it just kind of feels like just a gesture. We want to see more, but I totally get it. And in fact, it was the booing that made me want them to do it even more. Yeah, and it's that if they'd been. Just like Hashi, my wife's Nigerian, and she said to me when they missed a penalty, Ravin, get ready for the racism tomorrow, and
it's awful, isn't it? Isn't it awful when you have to think like that? I mean, we'll only know that we're making progress when people don't have to think like that. Ravin, thank you very much indeed. It's 21 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
For Stanley Johnson, Ben Bradshaw, Hashi Mohamed and Harriett Baldwin with me answering your questions. Let's go to Luke in Bromley. Hi, Luke.
Hi, guys. Hi, everybody. When the 19th of July comes, will it reveal the true impact on society of these lockdowns, and how can we fix it?
Hashi.
I mean, I think the 19th of July is a watershed moment, and I personally think it can't come soon enough. I'd love to be in the studio and meeting people and be going out there. But of course, we have to be responsible. So I do think it's quite important, but I don't know. I feel, the other day I was just thinking, I feel like we're in this period of time when we're going to have a lockdown, and then we're going to have an opening, and then we're going to keep going back and forth between lockdowns. And I just feel I can already see Stanley's son making this decision for us to open up throughout this summer period, only for us then to end up locking down during the winter. And so I would really like it to be something that is more permanent. And my God, society needs it. People need it. The businesses need it. Our mental health needs it. But equally, we have to be responsible. If we're getting to a point where most people are vaccinated, and I suppose this is one thing I'd love to know what other people think about this. If we're all sort of more or less double vaccinated now, and most of the vulnerable people have been vaccinated, what's the reason for us to ever go back into a lockdown, even if the numbers go up significantly?
Stanley, that's an important point, isn't it? Which I think a lot of people have lost sight of, that if the vaccination programme was worth anything, it's exactly for that reason, isn't it? That we can open up and still maintain a reasonable confidence that we're not going to be hospitalised if we get it.
I'm with Hashi 100% on this. I don't think we can possibly go back into lockdown, and I think that we've just got to be steady as we go now. We having opened up, we've got to stay open. We've got to remember that we have had times when even flu has had a fatality rate of, I think there's one season when we had 20,000 fatality rate of flu. You know, we've just got to look this one in the face. Death may happen, illness may happen, but the figures will be small, and I don't think we should be deterred. Now, I personally have no inside knowledge on this topic, none at all, but I very much expect that 19th of July, as Hashim said, will be a watershed moment, and I do not expect that we'll go back into lockdown.
In essence, Harriett, it's learning to live with COVID, isn't it? That's what we've all got to try and do. And when the government say, well, it's not going to be mandatory to wear masks anymore, that doesn't mean to say that we all just throw our masks away. We make judgments on the circumstances where we think we should continue to wear them.
Yeah, I mean, I warmly welcome this moment where we can move from passing laws to make people do things to actually taking responsibility for our own decisions on things like masks and in terms of the precautions that we take. But I think, Hashi is absolutely right in that what's different this time is that we've all been vaccinated. So 87% of people have had one jab. I think 66% have had two. And I think what is the sort of feeling that people have is that you have to pinch me because I can't believe how miraculous these vaccines are turning out to be. They are turning out to be incredibly effective, even against the Delta variant. So for last week, with the Office for National Statistics came out with, Iain, I'd be interested to know if you know how many people would normally pass away in a typical week in the United Kingdom of all causes. No idea. So the last week the ONS has published statistics, it was 8,700. How many of those people in that week died of COVID? 99.
Of COVID or with COVID?
Of. So 99 out of... So I think by looking at the statistics every day of just one particular illness, it's been a horrible illness, don't get me wrong, it's been a horrible illness, it's been very contagious, and we've had no antibodies for it at first. We now do have the antibodies, and that's why I think we'll sort of take a deep breath, step back, realise that we've had these miracle vaccines and we can move to a new phase of dealing with this pandemic.
Ben, it's interesting, those figures that Harriett just gave there, because if you look at the total death rate for 2020 and compare it to 2018, fewer people died in 2020 than 2018, even though we had all of those, 100,000 deaths through the pandemic. So, and presumably it's partly because there weren't people dying of flu because no one got the normal flu last year for obvious reasons, and maybe other fatalities were avoided as well. So it's terrible when you say that we have to learn to live with COVID and we will have to learn to accept a certain death rate, but that is just the fact of the matter, isn't it?
Yes, I'm not quite sure you're right, Iain, that there were no excess deaths or there've been no excess deaths during COVID. But I mean, I stand to be corrected.
It's just the calendar year. That's certainly I read.
Yeah,
that
but that's not the statistic that really matters, because what the statistic that really matters is excess deaths compared with the average year, and there have undoubtedly been excess deaths during COVID. But no, I completely take your point, and I'd be one of those who's been arguing that we need to have an honest debate about this for some time. I voted against the last two extensions of the restrictions, partly for that reason and other concerns I had about it. But I think in a way Boris Johnson's rather spoilt this unlocking by going the whole hog and not keeping some of the rather sensible, I think, public health mitigations that don't cost the economy anything, such as masks on public transport, ventilation, and saying that if people can work from home, that they should continue to do so. Because I just think, I'm on the Transport Select Committee. We desperately need to get people back on public transport, not least so that roads don't get so congested, going back to the item you were having before this hour. But quite a lot of people quite concerned about going on crowded buses or tubes if masks aren't mandated. And I cannot understand why they've scrapped that. I hope, they've already kind of backtracked on it a bit, haven't they, in the last 7 days. I hope by the time this comes in next week, they will do so further. That just seems to me to be an unnecessary. You give people more confidence in a way if you keep some of these measures that don't hurt the economy. The only other thing I'd say is that I completely agree with the other contributors that this we need to learn to live with this. We need to have an honest debate. We haven't quite had an honest debate yet about children and young people, have we? Because I'm not quite sure whether the government's policy, we're not so far vaccinating children or young people as when other countries are. So what's the alternative to that? Because if they're not going to be vaccinated, the only other alternative is they get infected, and eventually they achieve, or that cohort of people achieve herd immunity. But we haven't really discussed that properly. The only thing I can see that would reverse this is either if a variant emerges on which the vaccines aren't effective, and as others have said, they have proved to be very effective against all the variants so far, so let's keep our fingers crossed on that. And the other one is pressure on the health service. And I think, there are signs already of hospital numbers creeping up, and we know that there is massive pressure on the health service. We've already got the longest waiting times ever. There's a huge backlog of operations and treatments that need to be undertaken. And if numbers start building up again in hospitals and in A&E departments and in intensive care departments, I wonder what the government's response to that will be. I hope they're thinking about that now and putting in the resources as much as they possibly can in the short term to be prepared for that eventuality.
Hashi, very quickly.
Very quickly, it's just to pick up something there. I don't necessarily think we need to win the argument for avoiding further lockdowns by offering counterfactuals. When we start talking about excess deaths compared to 2018 to 2020, the basic premise suggests that those 2 years are comparable. There aren't. We will never know what life would have been like and what excess deaths we would have had it not been for all the lockdowns that we had, just as a basic premise. But what I think is the argument for no more lockdowns and the argument for coming back to normal in society is a very simple one. We are so far ahead of most people when it comes to vaccinations. We are now more aware than any other country. We are taking very good precautions, and the NHS hasn't been overwhelmed before. That argument can stand on its own. It doesn't need to be supported by how many people died in 2018 as compared to this year, or we've got to learn to live with it, which is also, the truth is that there are a lot of people who won't live with it because they won't live. So I just think the argument on why we should not go back stands and falls on its own without having to use the crutches of deaths that happened in 2018.
OK, thank you very much. Somebody says, I came home from Manchester to Euston last Friday, and within my carriage, the majority of people were not wearing a mask. Unsure how the government think people will personally wear them is beyond me. Well, I was going from Euston to Manchester, Macclesfield, and everyone was wearing a mask. So what's good for the goose and all of that. Right, we'll come back to more of your questions on Cross Question in just a moment. It's 8:34. News headlines with Lucinda Horsley.
England's final COVID restrictions will be eased next Monday, but the use of vaccine passports and face masks will still be encouraged. Experts fear there could be 200 coronavirus-related deaths a day over the summer as infections surge. England captain Harry Kane has said those behind the racist abuse of his teammates, "You're not England fans and we don't want you." Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka were targeted online after missing penalties in last night's Euro 2020 defeat to Italy. The FA is going to look at how some fans without tickets were able to break through security barriers and get into Wembley Stadium. They managed to join around 60,000 others who had paid to watch the final. LBC weather: heavy showers across southern England this evening, easing overnight to leave clear spells, a low of 11 degrees.
This is LBC.
Hey, Harriett.
Stanley Johnson, Ben Bradshaw, Hashi Mohamed and Harriett Baldwin with me taking your calls. They're going to take a text now from Christine in Cheadle, who says, does the panel agree with me that Boris Johnson is pretending to take climate change seriously just to bolster his own legacy? You might have a view on that, Stanley.
I do have a view, but I'm not having a view, as Boris's father on this one. I'm having a view possibly as the international ambassador of the Conservative Environment Network, because that's what I am at the moment. And I can tell you that we do take it seriously, and the Prime Minister and the government do take it seriously. I am actually, having been involved in this for something like 60 years myself, I am stunned how far and how fast we've actually gone in terms of high-level political acceptance. If you think what happened in Carbis Bay a month ago, I was actually, born in Penzance, and we lived in Carbis Bay, you believe, but that's just an aside. Well, what did Carbis Bay say? Carbis Bay said the climate change and the biodiversity issue are absolutely top of the agenda. Now we're looking forward to what's called COP26, which is the big conference that's meant to take place in Glasgow. Let's fingers crossed it does take place in Glasgow. Alok Sharma is our president, UK president. The Prime Minister is certainly going to be there. Other key leaders of the world are going to be there. And what are they going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to say, we have to get back on track. What did Paris do in December 2015? Paris said we've got to keep temperature rise below 2 degrees, and if possible, as low as 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Well, we're not on track at the moment, so this government has taken it extremely seriously. Would Boris hope that's part of his legacy? I should jolly well hope he would. And I would actually say that what is also exciting for me is that this government and the G7 have said actually the fight to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity and of nature is a crucial part of dealing with climate change.
But does he get it in his gut? Because David Cameron was always talked a good game on green issues, didn't he? But then he was heard talk. I can't remember whether he said it or whether he wrote it somewhere. But it's sort of the green mumbo jumbo or something. But Boris has got you whispering in one ear and Carrie whispering in the other. Does he need to be whispered to, or does he actually get it?
You know something? My line has been to write what I think, and I usually do, and I usually try and say it as definitively as I can. Whether Boris reads what I write is another matter. But he is 100%, I think, persuaded that the sheer economics of the business mean we really have to do climate change seriously. Just take one minor point. Harriett was in the government. What did we agree in Paris? We agreed that in order for the developing countries to come on board, there must be $100 billion a year to bring them on board in order we can meet the 2030 target. If we don't meet 2030, we're certainly not going to meet 2050, where we want net carbon zero. Well, crucial, but that amount of money is tiny, relatively speaking, relative to the cost we will have to pay if we don't do this. Do you see? And I think Boris has totally grasped that. And the point I've been working on with Liam Fox is on carbon taxes. Carbon taxes, particularly carbon border taxes, will produce money for the Treasury. So actually, Rishi Sunak will be absolutely thrilled to suddenly find that, yes, he can do it, there is money there, and of course he'll then have to make sure that White Van Man and others who might be impacted by the rise of price are not impacted unnecessarily.
Ben Bradshaw, are you willing to give the government any credit for its green credentials, particularly on climate change, or do you think that Boris Johnson is just, as the questioner says, pretending to take it seriously to bolster his legacy?
I think there's been a massive sea change in attitudes, and it wasn't that long ago that there were senior Conservative politicians who one would have put pretty clearly in the climate change denier camp. I mean, they are really voices in the wilderness now, if they still exist at all, and that is progress. I think my concern, and the concern of the Labour Party and climate change campaigners, and I think even the government's own independent advisors on climate change said this recently, didn't they, that although the government's good on rhetoric and it's good on targets, it's the policies to implement it's the policies that you need to implement to hit those targets that we're still missing. I mean, we're doing an inquiry on the Transport Committee at the moment into electric vehicles. Lots and lots of challenges in this country still around investment in charging, about equity, whether people will have access to charging points.
Don't say that. I've just bought one.
Well, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you researched. I'm sure you did your research into this.
Obviously, not well enough.
Well, do you have a drive, Ian?
I do, and I am getting one.
Well, if you have,
I'm getting a charging point at home.
If you have a drive, then you're very fortunate, because one of the problems at the moment is that if you can recharge your electric vehicle on your driveway, you pay about a fifth what you would pay if you had to recharge it in one of these publicly available on-street recharging points. So these are all things that really need to be addressed. And yes, I mean, 5 out of 10 to the government for grasping it, getting the rhetoric right and getting the targets right. But my worry about Boris Johnson's government and administration is it's very good on sort of rhetoric, but not so good when it comes to delivery. And on this issue, and I think Stanley will agree with me here, it has to be cross-government, and in the end, it's only the Prime Minister that can bang the different government ministers and departmental heads together to get real movement on this. Otherwise, it just disintegrates into turf wars.
Harriett Baldwin, you were in David Cameron's government. I don't think you were never in the sort of energy climate change field, were you? But Ben is absolutely right there. It has to come from the top. If the Prime Minister isn't behind it, nothing's ever going to happen. Do you feel that Boris Johnson gets this in his gut?
I think we've had Prime Minister after Prime Minister in this country who've all been consistently moving in this direction. I mean, I do, like I'm sure Ben does, a lot of school visits in the constituency, and this is what young people always ask politicians to do. I mean, I always push back on them and I say, well, do you walk to school? You know, do you cycle to school? Do you take the scooter to school? And they, you know, it's a good debating subject for a class at school. But I think one of the things that I always share as a fun fact is, did you know that carbon emissions in this country haven't been this low since the 1880s? So we have made 45% reduction already in terms of carbon emission but we've got the hardest yards
Stanley
to do.
Stanley was just a boy in the 1880s.
So we've got that trajectory, but the hardest yards are yet to come. There are practical issues, as Ben was saying, in terms of electric cars. I had a meeting with the grid in my constituency recently because actually the council wants to put in electric charging points and the grid's not strong enough, so they're going to have to build extra substations. So, you know, there are practical things, but I think the UK has a chance to be so much at the forefront of this that we will be the offshore energy experts, we will be the gigafactory leaders. This is creating jobs. It's creating a green industrial revolution.
Hashi, I don't know if you have a drive. You said you lived near Wembley, so I'm suspecting it's not a particularly long one to get your electric vehicle PowerPoint there. But what do you think about the question about, does the government really get climate change?
Well, the question specifically asked about whether Boris wanted to bolster his legacy. And here we have Stanley, whose legacy is Boris, has no idea what Boris's legacy is going to be. And so
that's slightly unkind.
I am laughing at Stanley. So it's a tongue in cheek, but I think for me, I do have a drive, and I actually drive a hybrid a Volvo.
Probably has a driver as well.
No, not yet, Stanley. I'll get there. I'm socially mobile. I've written a book on social mobility, so I'm trying to get there. I'm on my way.
Very good it is too. What's it called? Just seeing as you've mentioned it.
People like us, what it takes to make it in modern Britain. You wouldn't want to know about that, Stanley. You're already at the top. You're on your way down.
Downhill all the
way. But more seriously, you know, just picking up what Ben was saying, Volvo has a target. I drive a Volvo now. They have a target to have all of their cars electric by 2030. Volkswagen, which is already producing a number of cars that are electrically charged, are offering electric charging points in supermarkets to all cars, not just VWs. And so what my answer to this is simply that I think that the businesses and companies will get there before governments do. I really believe that, because I think they know that where people are is that people do want to make a difference in their areas. They do care about their environments, but they want to be given options, actually acceptable and affordable options. We may have done a hell of a lot since the 1880s, but the truth is, look at China, look at the United States. If we don't have a proper global approach, there's only so much we as a small island can do to really move the dial. To say nothing of Nigeria, one of the biggest growing African nations, and all of the other industrializing nations, it's going to have to be much bolder and much, much quicker.
Stanley, quickly.
Well, I think it is going to be bold. If you just take the EU for a moment, the EU has now introduced, or is in the process of introducing, something called a carbon border tax. And the EU is going to say, sorry, folks, if you don't have carbon reduction programs, we are going to impose taxes on the imports because it's the only fair thing to do. So I think that we can move. We have to move, obviously, with major other players like the EU, like the US. But I think it's not an act of war against China, but we simply have to say the time has come for everybody to bear the fair share.
OK, we will take another of your questions in just a couple of minutes' time. On LBC, it's 8:49.
This is LBC.
This is
52. Let's go to David in Enfield. Hi, David. What would you like to ask our panel?
Yeah, good evening, panel. In recent parliamentary testimony, Dominic Cummings observed that any political system giving the electorate a choice between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson as Prime Minister has gone seriously wrong. Does the panel agree?
David, are you running?
Go on, answer the question then.
Well, I mean, honestly, who do you think we are, politicians? We're people who all thought we could do a better job than the people who were running the country. So, David, if you think you can do a better job, then feel free, go for it.
But that is a widely held view, though, that it was a choice between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Well,
not by me.
No, we'll come to you in a minute, Stanley. I wouldn't have expected you to agree with the premise of the question, but people often say, well, of course, we haven't got the politicians like we had in the 1980s or the 1960s. And I'm sure in 2060, people will be saying, oh, we haven't got the politicians like we had in the 20-teens or whatever. But it's basically your fault, isn't it, Harriett? Because you are the ones that are effectively choosing these leaders.
Well, I don't want to go into the fact that I backed Jeremy Hunt in the leadership election in front of Stanley. That's a bit embarrassing. But I do think that in terms of the quality of people coming forward to be politicians, I think there were amazing people elected in the 2019 general election on our benches. I think it's such a shame we've been in a pandemic. We're not being able to sort of showcase how amazingly talented they are. But it's a democracy, and I also feel about Dominic Cummings that if he thinks he could do such a good job, then he ought to run for public office.
Hashi.
I do think that's a cop-out answer of if you can do better, why don't you run? Look, let's begin by saying that running a country is no walk in the park, nor is it something that is easy to do, nor do I have sort of any doubts that the vast majority of people who run for Parliament and want to represent their communities have a huge amount of sacrifice and do a great deal of this country, and we're much better than most people. But the fact of the matter is, what I would add to Dominic Cummings' statement of a country whose options are Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson is a country whose options are Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, who's advised by Dominic Cummings. And that is a profound shortcoming that we do have as a society, where our politicians are beyond sort of acceptable standards. I do think that the vast majority of the people who are in the Conservative Party, as well as the vast majority of people who are in the Labour Party, including Jeremy Corbyn, do not seriously offer options for this country. I think that they are often either completely out of touch, or they do not believe in what they are telling you, or they don't have any beliefs at all. And I think people sense that, people smell that, and people are profoundly sorry that we do not have a proper, coherent vision for this country that people can buy into. It may not be a vision that convinces the majority of people. It may not be a vision that is complete, and it may not be a vision that person will be able to see through in their own lifetime. But where are those ideas? Where are those visions?
In your book?
I don't know what. Oh, well, Iain, you're my biggest fan, but that only gives me one vote. But this is the problem. This is, I think, the problem is, when you see these people. And the other day I saw a Labour MP, I think it was, who was asking a question to Dominic Raab about, I don't know if you saw the clip where she says, are you going
Claudia
to,
Webb.
She said something about, are you going to sue this country? And to which the Dominic Raab came back and said, where are we going to sue them and what for? And she completely froze. So it was obvious that she just had this statement written for her. She had absolutely no idea what it meant. She had absolutely no idea. And the truth is, Dominic Raab wouldn't have had a proper answer if he was asked a proper question, because he's out of his depth where he is. And this is the problem. We're like blind leading the blind with no options.
Ben Bradshaw, you're known as Jeremy Corbyn's #1 fan. I'm sure you've got an interesting answer to this.
Yes, and I have to say, although I think Dominic Cummings is a compromised witness, I think there's some truth in this statement, and I think David's onto something. I mean, look, I think the problem we have, and I hate to bring it back to our political system and our electoral system, but I can't help thinking that part of it is to do with a system that delivers huge power to a party on a minority of the vote, whether it's Conservative or Labour in government.
I don't remember you complaining about that when you were a minister in the Blair Brown
on the contrary, Ian, I've always been a supporter of electoral reform. I have consistently supported electoral reform, and I think that those countries like Germany and the Scandinavian countries that have it tend to be better governed by politicians of generally of better calibre. But I think the system that both the Conservatives and the Labour Party have for electing their leaders is also ludicrous. I mean, we elect our leaders by our members, who tend to be not only unrepresentative of a lot of Labour voters, but also unrepresentative of the country as a whole. And I'm afraid it's the same with the Conservative. I mean, they have an even narrower electorate, which is the Parliamentary Conservative Party. And, I don't know what the answer to this is, but I do think that changing our voting system is part of it, and changing the way that our political parties elect their leaders is part of it.
We're running out of time. Stanley?
I'm proud of what the Prime Minister has achieved. I don't at all agree with Dominic Cummings. I don't agree with people who say the political system is fraught with rubbish. On the contrary, I think there are brave men and women who do know what they want. They do seek election. Years ago, I stood and was elected to the European Parliament. I knew exactly what I wanted. As it turns out, it's not what has happened. But on this sort of thing, I think we are very lucky. And as far as Boris is concerned, I'm proud of what he's done. He has got us out, I think, of the COVID thing. That is a mega achievement. And from my point of view, he is going to lead us also out of the problem of climate change, loss of biodiversity, and on social issues. I think what we are seeing now on the levelling up front is going to take the Tories a very long way.
Right, quick final text question from Liam in Newcastle, but it could come from Ian in Tunbridge Wells as well. After England's defeat, I've been moping around all day. How should I deal with the heartbreak? I have to say, I couldn't watch any of the news channels this morning. I didn't want to. It was a sense of grief. And it was a sort of childlike grief in a way. Ben Bradshaw, you're chuntering in the background.
I was completely silent. I mean, be happy.
No, that was me. That was me.
Oh, sorry.
Be happy for the Italians who were the better team on the day, and for the Italian people, because they've been through a lot as well. And we did really well getting as far as we did, and the team did us all proud. And I hope that's something we can hang on to.
I've been feeling a sense of grief throughout the day as well, Ian. I'm completely distraught about it. But I'll give one positive statistic about last night and this tournament. The England team only conceded 2 goals in the whole of the championship. One was scored from outside the box, and the other one was literally bundled in. Now, if that doesn't tell you that we have a really decent team that's properly organised, that could go further with an average age of 25, then there's a lot to be cheerful about. And last night was just an arbitrary randomness that lost the stat, and I'm still feeling the pain.
Well, I've written a piece on the LBC website today. It's on the front page if you want to go and have a look at it. It makes many of the points you've just made there, Hashi. Stanley?
I say amen to that. I think that this is the day to move ahead. Put football aside for a while. Concentrate on rugger.
I'll never do that. You sort of moving on to Qatar 2020.
Yeah, looking on to the World Cup, definitely. Yeah, because I think they did do such an amazing job. They were such an impressive team, and they absolutely could win the World Cup. So that's where I
be optimistic.
My optimism.
Have some faith. Have some trust in Gareth. We trust. I think that's the message, isn't it? Listen, thank you so much to all 4 of you: Ben Bradshaw, Hashi Mohamed, Stanley John. I nearly said Stanley Baldwin then. Stanley Johnson and Harriett Baldwin.
Well, there we go.
Join us again tomorrow for another Cross Question at 8 o'clock. Coming up in a moment, we're going to be talking about a 4-day week. Would you like a 4-day week? I work a 4-day week, sort of. Best thing I've ever done. 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, England's restrictions will ease as planned a week today, meaning an end to enforced home working and table service and no more limits on indoor mixing. We will be encouraged to wear masks still in crowded areas, and self-isolation